reflect back, to some of these ethical questions that we've got and the dilemmas that might show up. So with that in mind, then I'm going to share some slides with you. And again, I encourage questions. Theodora is chair of the ethics committee, so I think we've got some resident wisdom here in the room with us too. And so I might lean on you a little bit too, Theodora, as we go forward. And so I appreciate you attending. So with that, if you've got questions, please sing out. What I think you're going to find when it comes to ethical situations is the black and whiteness is not often there. And so some of it is really digging deep into yourself to figure out what do you do in these situations when they present? And do you need more support? What are the questions you have? Because sometimes the questions don't have answers that are really clear. Okay. So with that, let's go ahead and launch. All right. And so the way that I frame this is really how you use the ICF Code of Ethics in your coaching practice, because that's what we're talking about here, is something we've agreed to do. And as I said, it's long been a passion of mine since I believe it's not about situational decision making. It's about how your values show up in your decision making. And knowing what's expected can help you determine whether you're in the right place or not, which leads to values-based decision making. So let's talk a little bit about what we're gonna do over the next hour. And this is an interactive conversation. So, I don't know when the last time you sat in a really boring lecture was, but for me, it happens fairly frequently. And that's not my intent here. It's to bring it to life. How do you use the code of ethics in your coaching practice? I think that's the important part of this, is because it's not just a standalone document with rules, rules, rules. It's something we embody in our everyday life, but also something that comes to life in our coaching. And then we'll do some breakouts and discuss a couple of case studies. And there's an opportunity to share questions and possible answers. So possible answers and ideas, and to be curious. Okay. So I'll start off with, what's the difference between morals and ethics? Anybody? I mean, if I asked you, so when you think about morals and ethics, what do you think is different? Okay, this is the interactive
I,
participant.
I I can have a
Okay,
go. I can have a go and
sure.
try.
Go ahead,
So
Polly.
I think there is a lot in common. But morals are not really, it's our perception of morals, of what's good and what's bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's right and what's wrong, what's legal, what's not legal. While ethics is a little bit more documented, I think it's prescribed. I think it depends on certain regions or countries have got different rules, laws, and so on. And so, yeah, that's what I think.
And I think, you're in the right space, and I'll kind of throw this out for you, right? And so, I think ethics are something we agree to. And that's a big piece of it. It's the rules of conduct in a particular culture or group recognized by an external source or social system. And so when you think about how that applies to the ICF, I mean, we adhere to the ICF Code of Ethics as coaches. And so we've agreed that we will abide by this code of ethics. Whereas morals are, I think it's back to what you said, it's the right or wrong of it all. So, and it's based on an individual's own compass of right or wrong. One of the things, I have a compass rose on my necklace here, because I really do recognize that I've got my own moral compass, and it for me, it's my true north. And so I've always lived under the belief if I have to ask myself if it's right or wrong, it's probably wrong, because I have a pretty good sense of what's right. But I think in this ethics space, it's also what you agree to. Okay. And I think that's really an important underwriting of what, or underpinning for what we're doing here, is that we are agreeing to abide by a certain set of guidelines. I mean, the word rules has its own implication, but we've agreed to be in this space, in this set of guidelines, and adhere to it. And I want to be clear about what we're talking about here. We're talking about the ICF Code of Ethics, okay? And so it's the ICF standards of right and wrong that prescribe what coaches do, okay? So it's what we ought to do, usually in terms of the rights, obligations, and benefits to society, fairness, or specific virtues. And in this space, I think it's important to note that with this current version of the ICF Code of Ethics, they've really tied it into the core values of the ICF in what I consider to be a meaningful way. Because the ICF is an ecosystem, this coaching space that we're in. And so, I wanted to go ahead and put the core values up here. So as we start talking about the ICF ethics a little bit more, you can see what we're talking about here. Because it's everything that we are as coaches, not just a set of rules. And so when you look at the list, Theodora, go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt you
No,
mid-sentence,
no.
Bonnie. But it strikes me that, coaching is not regulated
That's right.
like professions are. But guess what? We are self-regulated. So and that's really important, that we are constantly putting our heads together over and over again to come up with that framework, including the values, including the code of ethics.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I appreciate you putting the emphasis on that because as an evolving profession, as we learn more about what shows up in the space, but also when you look at the ICF itself and the ethics piece, there's stuff that's showing up that might be new, that might not have been anticipated, and it's constantly being integrated into this ecosystem that we've got in a way that highlights it to people as, hey, pay attention to this because it's something that could happen. Have a plan before it happens. I think bringing this together, though, with the core values is what brings it to life because it is not a standalone set of rules anymore. And, the question I asked myself is when I looked at these core values, what theme began to emerge in my mind around what these core values represent? And for me, it's a statement that I've heard also often when dealing with ICF, and that is we can make the world a better place through coaching. Because that embodies what we do as coaches at the service of the client. And the core values and the weaving of the code of ethics the way it is now really does make that circle start to complete itself in how we show up and the support and the foundation of what we're doing here. And so in a nutshell, I mean, I'm gonna, highlight what happened a year ago. It's just been about a year ago. And the ICF Code of Ethics was updated as it is done periodically, which I think, again, speaks to the evolution of the profession that we're in. And as I started looking at how the sections are named and where the majority of standards show up, I thought it spoke really well to where the ICF placed additional definition and emphasis to ensure clarity and cover extra ground. That said, situations where ethics might show up aren't always that easy to name, as you'll see in the case studies we will discuss. And while some things are very clear, others require us to have those internal conversations or mentoring or supervision that better give us the foundation to function within the ICF ecosystem, which includes the core values and the ethics. And so here's what we're going to, we're going to focus on this. We're ICF professionals. Whether credentialed or not, you're a member of the ICF if you agree that you will adhere to the code. Okay? As part of that, you agree. And so there it is. And so it focuses on behavior of the ICF professional, and the 5 standards have a prelude as an ICF professional. And so again, it frames that place that we're in. It's active voice, not try, only do. And I refer to that as kind of Yodaizing things. If you remember Yoda, there is no try, there is only do. I think it speaks again to we're done with the trying. We're done with the seeing if you can. We're really in that space of, yeah, you can, and you must. Okay. Because the majority of the work is with clients, my focus in this conversation is going to be applying the ethics to our client relationship and the behaviors we model with our clients. So I'll start off with this. A while back, I attended a webinar conversation with Wendy Ann Smith um, that was hosted by the Institute of Coaching. And she's the author of the Ethical Coach's Handbook and used the word ethicality. And the word really resonated with me, and it caused me to reflect on the idea of how I should or I would embody ethical behavior in my coaching. Because according to Smith, when we apply the word to coaching, ethicality speaks to the only promise we can really make to our clients, and that is, who am I going to be with you as your coach? And I thought that was a pretty powerful question to ask, is that who am I going to be as a coach to my clients? It's a deep question I think that we should ask ourselves often. And the question led me to coaching supervision. And I found that often the clients I supervise find themselves in the same reflective space when discussing particular clients. Like, who am I as a coach with this client? And because coaching is about what best serves the clients, any conversation about ethics should have a similar frame to my way of thinking. In other words, how does this code of ethics help me better understand who I am as a coach with my client? And that's the approach I've taken with it. And so, working with Smith's use of ethicality applied to the ICF code may better help bring the code to life for you in your coaching practice. As I designed the conversation today, I kept coming back to the word ethicality and how stuck I was with the application of it. And I wanted to put this together in a way that you can walk away inspired in your thinking about how to view and apply the ICF Code of Ethics when interacting with your clients. And so if appropriate for you, it might be something you want to explore with your own coach, mentor, or supervisor, because there can be so many levels to the question. And so many times I find that we get back to ethics in a lot of questions that my clients have with me when we're mentoring or supervising. So let's briefly go through the ethics here. And there was some that stood out more than others. And so, when I looked at it, I thought ethicality in like section 1 could include, how do you conduct your discovery chemistry call with your clients? How do you explain coaching to new clients? What kinds of conversations do you have with clients and are sponsored about what is shared and when? What kind of termination clause do you have in your contract or your agreement? How do you effectively partner with your client to ensure they understand their right to quit you and your right to quit them? I mean, these are foundational questions, I think, that need to be reviewed at least once. I teach in a level 2 program, and one of the questions my students ask me is, why do you go over this in your discovery call? And I said, well, I have it in my contract, but I just don't believe that everybody reads contracts. And so some things bear repeating, because the goal isn't to understand each other, it's actually to agree on it. The way the ICF code was rewritten is we will have agreement on these things, not just understand them. And I think having the conversation allows the questions to be asked so that we can agree. And so I offer that to you, as you think about how to apply these. So what is your role? How do you explain what you do in coaching? How does it differ from the other modalities that are out there? All coaching engagements mean sponsored and unsponsored. So what is a sponsored engagement? What's your understanding of what a sponsored engagement is? Because my understanding, as it's written, is that the client is the person being coached. The sponsor is the person paying for the coaching. If the sponsor wants access to the information that's going on in the coaching, what do you do if the client doesn't agree? What kinds of conversations have you had beforehand about this? What happens when you run into a client in public? What agreement do you have with your client? I live right outside of Louisville, Kentucky, and Louisville is a funny place because we refer to it as 2 degrees of separation. And I've only lived there 7 years, but virtually everybody I know knows at least one other person I know. And it's not that I travel in the same circles. My husband and I are in completely different circles. And yet His people know my people all the time. So I coach people in Louisville, Kentucky, but I don't tell other people who I coach in Louisville, Kentucky. I've had people introduce me as their coach to other people because it's always their story to share, but it's not my story to share. And so these are things that have to come up if you're coaching internally or if you're coaching externally. What happens when you run into a client in public? What do you say about them to other people around you? And I think these are things that, again, come back to this confidentiality that's not explicit in the conversation about confidentiality, but it's something that needs to be thought about as you go forward. In a former life, I did run into people periodically that I knew in other circumstances. And we agreed that we would not acknowledge each other in public. What do you do in your coaching space? Okay. Again, conversations to have. As I mentioned before, I think it's important to note the distinction in the 2025 update to the ICF ethics, and that the word agreement replaced understanding with respect to the language in 2.3 about this clear agreement with clients. And so when you think about the difference between the words understanding and agreement, how do you gain agreement with your clients? I mean, to me, they're clearly different. And so I think that's, again, something to think about. How do you gain agreement? It's interesting to me that coaching is a conversation, and yet so often our conversations are incomplete when it comes to communicating. And so I think focusing on the words is really important in this space. Yeah, Carrie.
I was just going to say that when it comes to understanding, especially some of these kind of conversations, one of the things I will do is invite the person to share back, kind of what are you taking from this? Like now that I've shared some of these things to you around ethics or around our agreements or around our whatever. I mean, usually we're building them together, but I like to end with a, what are you taking away? What does this mean to you? And then that way I can quickly hear if there's something way off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a beautiful way to put it, because at the end of our coaching conversation, one of the questions we ask is, what are you walking away with? So in establishing this coaching agreement from the very beginning, asking those questions is really important. So as I tell my students, the worst thing you can do is assume you know what somebody's talking about in a coaching conversation. And so I like that. Thank you very much. Paulo.
Yeah, thank you, Bonnie. So you've mentioned earlier a sponsored client, right? So I think that's actually, some questions started coming up in my head is the fact that in my world it's actually quite common to have the job of an internal coach. So we're internal coaches to organizations, and in my view, there is kind of a three-party contract. So it's a contract that you've got with your employer, and then there is a coaching contract with the clients, the teams, let's say teams or individuals, right, within the organization. What often happens is that as part of your contract with your employer, sometimes you might be asked to report on certain things like KPIs, for example, or performance indicators, whatever. And in what I've always done is when I contract with my clients, i.e., teams and individuals, I've always made that completely clear and transparent that I'm being asked by the sponsor, i.e., the leadership of the company, to actually report on these KPIs. I've taken for granted that I will still remain confidential. The conversations are still confidential. However, the clients, the end clients, i.e., the teams and the individuals that I'm coaching, are very much aware that I am actually meant to report on certain KPIs that I'm contracted to.
And I think that's important because, again, back to that agreement. What's the agreement that you have with the sponsor is actually separate than the agreement you have with the client.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the client does not agree that that information should be shared, then you've got to go back to the sponsor, and it might nullify the entire agreement with the sponsor.
Yeah.
And so I think, so the clients are entering into this fully aware of what's going on. I think the bigger piece of it is, if they agree to it, how deep does the coaching go? And so it's being aware of the limitations maybe of the coaching in that space would be helpful.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it has never been a problem. I
Hmm.
never had a kind of a team or an individual that said, "Oh no, I don't want to be coached by you because you're going to report so whatever KPIs." Um, but I feel like there what would be really ethical of me is to actually make that transparent from the start, so that it doesn't come as a surprise later, right?
I
So
think that's hugely
transparency
important.
overrides. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Back to that agreement versus just understanding. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, and they agree that they acknowledge that that's going on, or they agree that it's going on. I think the only question I would have for you is, you know, something to think about is how might that limit the coaching if they
Mm.
think it's being reported back to their boss?
Yeah. Well, there are other things that I also make
Yeah,
transparent
fair enough.
in the
Yeah.
context of ICF, for example, is confidentiality has got certain limits, right? So, like, for example, if,
Hmm.
if laws are being broken, if company assets are being misused,
Right.
or stolen, for example, materials are being stolen, or confidential assets are being disclosed elsewhere,
Right.
and that comes up in the conversation, in the
Yeah.
coaching conversation, then again, that's, I think, outside the scope of confidentiality.
So, Paolo, what I will tell you, I think that's hugely important. And I've worked with clients in supervision that are doing internal coaching programs where that confidentiality piece has never really been defined for them. And so they're in a gray area when working with their clients. So the fact that that's even being defined, I think, is hugely important. And so I'll commend you on that. It's just, there's a couple of other questions that come to mind, but I think for the sake of this, we'll move forward. But I appreciate your input there because I think there's some pieces there for others to gain, and that is what are the limits of confidentiality if you're coaching inside that place? Again, the worst time to figure them out are when you've got a problem. And so working with the internal coaching program to make sure that everybody understands what's being conveyed to the clients, I think is hugely important. This 2.4, I think, is something to focus on, and that is we're tech, I don't, you might call yourself a coaching practice, but you're now a technology company because you're reliant on technology so often to do your business. But just be aware of the limits of technology to protect information. And if you are coaching somebody internally and you're transmitting any information internally on the company-owned computers, that does not belong to you or your client. It belongs to the company. And so be thoughtful about that. I have clients that'll say to me, "Hey, can we go to my Gmail account? I don't want to use my company account." Or can we use, my own phone versus my company phone? And again, that's their call because there are limits to client confidentiality when you're using a company system. So the code went a little bit further even in this technology piece with this latest rewrite. And I think that's really important to pay attention to. And that is AI. Be aware of what's going on in AI. It doesn't mean you have to be an expert, but there's a lot going on in that space. So be aware of what you're feeding into the data oceans that are out there that might identify your clients. Okay. As I put it here, ICF is paying attention to AI, and so should you. As you put information into your AI tools, what client information could be exposed? Because it's not like AI is going out looking for things, but it goes scraping. And if you've got information out there that it scrapes, it could pull up, information that is confidential for your clients. So as you go out there and do that, be mindful about what kind of some of us might make transcripts of recordings. What kind of client identifiable information is in those transcripts? Okay. Some of us might be storing or, somehow or other feeding into some sort of a generative AI capability to help us come up with questions. Just be aware of what kind of client identifying information is in that. because it's all out there. And as we know, once it's on the internet, it never goes away. And so also be responsible for any support people that you've got working with you or others with respect to client information. If you've got a virtual admin, I mean, I've had admins over the years, and we're very, very clear about what goes on my calendar that could be viewed publicly and what can't. Okay, so I might have appointment and my private calendar shows what it is, but my public calendar would just show it blocked. So be thoughtful about what's on your calendar if others can see. I think this is, a piece of this is don't spam other coaches. It talks to board leadership, it talks to other capabilities, and don't claim other people's intellectual property. This never used to be spelled out this way, but I think right now it's so ubiquitous, this access to other stuff, AI and other ways to do it. Don't claim something that's not yours. Ethically, it's wrong. But if you're doing that, what else are you doing? And so, it's kind of like the old, if I catch you in one lie, I could say, well, maybe I misunderstood you. But about the second and third time, I start to doubt you overall. And so in this space, be thoughtful about what you're doing with other people's stuff. So I think this is a good time. And I mean, and Paolo, you kind of like preluded to this a little bit to just take a look at a case study. And so what you'll know is if you ever sat in a conversation with me before, you probably won't see the same case study twice because I'm always thinking of different ways that these can be applied. But this is one that I think, bears maybe a little bit of thought for those particularly that are doing internal coaching. And so what I want to do is I'm going to break you back up into your groups again for maybe about 5 minutes to discuss this so that we can manage our time. But I'll read it to you so you get a flavor for where I'm kind of going with this. And again, this is, I think, important to think about as we do internal coaching and as we coach more people. So you're coaching two mid-level leaders at the same company. You've been working with both on leadership styles that will help increase their upward potential. You become aware they are both competing for the same job that will lead to a promotion for whichever is selected. Neither of these individuals know that you are coaching the other, but both are aware that the other is applying for the same promotion. Because you were brought by company HR to coach them, you were asked by HR which of the two you believe would be the best candidate for the position and promotion. And so the questions for you are, what are the ethical considerations with this situation? And how might you apply the notion of ethicality?
This is a real scenario in my world, Bunny. So this happens all the time.
Yeah, I suspected that this would speak a lot to what you've got going on.
Yeah.
And so what I'm going to do is I'll break you out into rooms for, let's say 5 minutes, because otherwise, our stories will start to get longer and longer. Just the questions are, what are the ethical considerations? So if you could just, maybe think about that. What in all of this, if you want to take a screenshot of this before we start, that might be helpful. And then how do you apply your own internal compass of ethicality to this situation? What do you do? What's one thing you could do or two things you could do? Or maybe three things. I don't know. Up to you. All right. So I'm going to open the rooms. Let's go 5 minutes.
Yeah, Bonnie, it has you
Yes.
going into one of the rooms.
I won't.
Okay.
Maybe I'll stay out. How's that? Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Does it have everybody else going in though? I just want to make sure.
It looks like it has everybody moving
Okay.
into a room. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So let's take a couple of minutes and just kind of discuss anything that came up for you in this space. I mean, what's the first thing you noticed about this?
Well, I'll share.
Sure.
I had not experienced this in my coaching because it's mostly one-on-one and I'm a sole practitioner. However, I'm not sure I'd be comfortable taking on the arrangement, first and foremost. And second, could I maintain my impartiality and objectivity if I were to take it on? And how could I guarantee I wouldn't have biases? Having owned businesses, hired people in the past, how could I set my intuition or radar aside to make sure that this was neutral for all parties?
Wow, that's a big kind of introspection going on there. Yeah. What else?
I haven't done it, so I'm
Yeah.
glad people in the class have done this.
Well, so remember what I said. I mean, it's more about like, what are the considerations that need to go into this, right? It's if it was black and white, it would be easy. But what I find with ethics is generally when you have an ethical dilemma, it's not easy.
I think
And so,
there are at least two ethical dilemmas here, right?
sure.
The first one is, and I think that's what you were talking about, Mark, is when we become aware that we're coaching two people and they are competing with each other for one position. And again, Mark was talking about bias, totally agreed. I think in our conversation with Karen and Mariana, the same thing came up. We can't actually guarantee. So that's the first ethical. Do we continue now that we've become aware, that we've realized that we're coaching two people that are competing with each other? Do we continue? That's the first ethical issue. And then we need to know, is there another coach available that we can recommend one to move to, or not? And if not, what else can be done? So that's the first one. The second one, of course, it's the HR request, and obviously, um, our code of ethics says that we cannot actually disclose, or we're not the right person to disclose that information, because that will break our confidentiality agreement with the individuals. And so it's actually, in my view, when this happened to me, I just referred to the manager of those two people so that conversations can be done with whoever has authority and knowledge and understanding of what needs to be done.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot going on behind the scenes here. And so one of the takeaways I had as I was writing this is what was in your contract? Your contract with your sponsor and your contract with your clients. What was in the contract? Because some of this could be avoided if you think through to what are the things that need to be in place. Some of it can't be. Some of it's just like, holy cow, who saw this coming? What I call the Dory out of Finding Nemo moment, right? It's like, whoops, who saw this coming? But the reality of it is some of it can be alleviated if you're thoughtful about your contracting and there's agreement about what's going on there. Two people applying for the same position or competing for the same position, yikes. And so we're going to move a little bit into conflict of interest because there's a clear conflict of interest that could go on in the space. And so, but as Mark said, like sitting with your own biases, I think is an important thing to do because anytime you get into one of these things, I can guarantee you your bias will show up. And so recognizing that, number one is going to be like, what's my bias here? It's going to be a big question to ask yourself. But the other part of it is, what are the other pieces that need to happen here? Because you also represent a larger thing than yourself in your coaching practice. You represent coaches overall. So imagine that it gets out at your company, Paolo, that you're coaching people competing for a job. And so you're telling a supervisor that one is more qualified than the other, and neither of them know that you're coaching the other one or that was part of the deal that was going on. What happens to the coaching program at your company? Yeah.
Trust is lost. Yeah, no trust.
No trust. And and good news travels, but bad news travels a lot faster.
Yeah.
And so the word will be out very, very quickly about how corrupt the coaching program is and how biased it is and how they're picking favorites. I mean, people will make up all kinds of crazy stories. And so in this place, foundationally, there's a lot of things that could be done to prevent it. But in that moment, there's also, as you mentioned, what else, what other ideas came up with the group as you guys were talking? Sure, Lizzie.
So we had a good discussion, and one of the options that came up was recusal, saying, recusing myself from the situation. We get on to that, right?
Yeah, there's like run for the hills, right? Yeah. What other options are there?
One of the
Sure.
things that came up for me is I've been in corporate for 35 years. Sometimes when situations like these come up, and instead of even involving the coach at all, there's a lot of companies that now are using assessments to qualify the traits needed for a position. So I would say the company needs to kick off their process in that area and leave the coach completely outside of the loop.
Yes. I mean, and so it's a great offering that the coach could make. Like, look, I'm not going to be involved in this, but here's some other ideas for you. I always say when a manager comes to me to ask me how to performance manage their employee, I'm more comfortable helping the manager step into their management role. Because performance management is not the job of a coach, as far as I'm concerned. But that's how I define it. I'm nobody's henchwoman anymore. My days of hiring and firing are over. So there's that piece of it, right? Again, this is back to your ethics, right? What's the right thing to do? I could walk you through several steps you could take, but at the end of the day, so much of it could have been avoided up front. And everything you guys are saying, it's all right. But what do you do when you're in the situation? Any other thoughts? Yeah. I mean, my first thought is like, don't get here. But you know what? But sometimes it happens. Natalie, sure.
Yeah, am I off mute?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, good. My first thought was, yes, run for the hills. And then one of the persons in my breakout group also said going back to the code of ethics, and standing on that as a pillar of stability. But then the other thing, just in this conversation that you had just shared, I thought, oh, I think I would step into the coaching role with the HR manager and and coach them through their decision process, and leave the two coachees out of it, but direct the conversation back to them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so much of this comes back down to, and again, in supervision, I find a lot of times, I mean, there's either some sort of an ethics issue going on, or what was the agreement? What did you contract to do here? What was your contract with the company? What was your contract with your clients? And if what they're asking of you is not covered in that contract right off the bat, there's some foundation, right? So, which is back to the ethics piece. What did you contract to do here? And so with respect to these two clients, they might not be aware that you're coaching each other, but you certainly are. And it's okay to say to a client, hey, I coach a lot of people in this organization, and I want you to know that sometimes I find myself in a situation and it might be a good time for us to take a break. Or it might be, I find myself sometimes in a situation where I might be coaching people who are in the same space. What do you want to do with that information? Back to the client. You don't have to give names, but manage the conflict of interest. But so much of what I'm doing with you guys right now is helping shape the importance of making sure that you don't have that Dory moment of like, who saw this coming? Because we're all out there looking for business. And so sometimes it's easy to say yes to something without thinking it 3 or 4 steps through. Mm-hmm. But there's a solid foundation that you can lean on with the ICF. And the reason the ethics are there is, I suspect, and Theodora could probably attest to this, that a lot of these situations have come up before. And questions were asked or complaints were made, one or the other. Yeah, Trista, I saw you come off mute.
It was actually an accident. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Okay. So with that, let's go ahead and move forward for the sake of time. How do you guys feel a little, it's not going to be complete because you know what? Because I have yet to come up with an ethical problem that has got a solid for me. Moral and ethical are different for me. Morals I can come up with in a minute. Ethics sometimes I really have to sit with. But what I do know is I can sit with it in a way that'll allow me to avoid it the next time. All right. So I will share my screen again. All right. So this kind of walks us through this conflict of interest, right? Professional conduct and conflicts of interest. And, I view conflict of interest kind of like, house guests, they don't get better with time. So, and so here it is. I am aware and discuss with all involved parties the implications of having multiple agreements. I think that's hugely important in this space. I think the key to this is I'm aware of. Okay. Because that last situation was actually the lack of awareness of. Because, in our early days, as we're out there getting as many clients as we can, sometimes we don't pay attention to the third, fourth, and fifth step that could come in. So 3.1 to 3.3 really talk about what's expected around conflicts of interest and our responsibility for managing and resolving them. And my view is earliest is best. Okay. And so do you have coaching, consulting, and training agreements with the same clients? And how might terms of what is shared differ in each of those agreements? How clear is your role in the eyes of the company based on your contracts? How clear is your role in the eyes of your clients based on what you're doing? How clear is your role in your own eyes based on what you're doing? The other thing I want to take you back to the core values here and remind you, there's a client on the other end of this conflict of interest and a coaching profession on the other side, okay? How you represent yourself is larger than you and has impact beyond you and your business. There's a real life human being involved in this coaching. And, and while we're in business, there's a real life human being on the other end of this coaching. And there's a whole profession that you represent as you do this. And I think that's the piece that as you look at your conflict of interest, you've got to remember. It's not just about you and legal trouble or you and anything else. There's another human being and there's a larger profession that you represent here. And so think this stuff through. I kind of frame this one as that if you can't be with it, you can't coach it. Okay. Don't take a client that has things going on that you can't be with. Right now, we're in a pretty polarized place. Okay. And there's a lot of strong opinions and a lot of rightness out there, depending on who you ask. You're not going to change people's minds. And so coaching isn't a place to argue your views or have this idea that somehow or other you're going to reform somebody. Okay. Refer them to somebody else if you can't be with what they bring. And, the way I've always viewed coaching is I don't have to hire everyone that wants to hire me. I can say no. And so, I like coaching leaders. I like coaching people that want to lead better lives. I don't particularly want to coach relationships. I've raised all of my young people. Young people have got a lot of drama going on. I'm kind of in a space where I don't want a lot of drama in my life. But I know some great relationship coaches. I don't particularly want to coach adolescents. Again, I've raised my young people. But I know some really good people that coach adolescents, great coaches. And so I'm happy to refer people to a place where they will get better service and better coaching than they would with me. And so this is that place, right? If you can't be with it, don't coach it. This is kind of like the ooh piece of it, right? This isn't good. It's not putting the client first. It's not ethical behavior. And so we are at the service of our clients. This does not serve your client. This is call what you're doing. Coaching's not manipulation. It's not sneaky. It is done with the client's permission. if you get money for referring clients to other assessment tools or other people, tell them about it. They have a choice of whether to go or not. So I might say to a client, there's a really good program that you might want to take a look at. Here's what it costs. They pay me a finder's fee. I offer this to you if that's something you want to pursue. Now, this is a really good program that will take you where you want to go, and you should do it. And so that's it, right? Be upfront about what you're doing. Conflicts of interest are best avoided right up front. So I think this is one of those pieces that says ethicality and commitment to delivering consistent value. One of the things I think about in this space is this coaching across cultures. And a couple of years ago during the pandemic, I attended a webinar on equity where the speaker made a statement that when she begins a coaching conversation, she asks the client, how will they let her know if she has offended them? And I find that to be such an elegant way to partner with a client in making sure that we're both in a place where we can be in a safe space to say, hey, that hurt. And the program that I teach in, we have what we call the oops, ouch program. And so I can say ouch, and the other person has the right to say, oops, I didn't mean it like that. Because it's really, really easy to get offended, and I find it even more easy in these days. And so I thought that was so powerful. And here's what I know about me. I'm not everybody's cup of tea. Just like not everybody is my cup of tea. So giving the client permission to be a full partner in the relationship is a great way to exercise my view of what ethicality is. In other words, who am I when I'm with you is your partner coach. And as full partners in this, you're allowed to tell me, hey, that hurt. And I'm allowed to say, that was not my intention. What do we need to do to not have this happen again? And so that's that piece, right? So it's consistent value. Stay present with your clients. And so one of the things that that this requires is know when you get triggered. So I tell my students a lot, I can tell when a coach gets triggered because the coach starts to talk and tell their story. And the coach's story takes over the coaching. And so pay attention to what triggers you. Work it out with your own coach or therapist. And you heard me say this before, if you aren't the right coach, refer the client somewhere else. If you feel it, they feel it. Coaching isn't magic. It's hard work for the client. You can't promise them an outcome they aren't willing to work to accomplish. Coaching is client-driven, client-directed, and client-enacted. And I add that and client-enacted. If they don't do the work, they don't get the outcome. Okay? And because coaching is a referral-heavy business, misrepresenting your abilities is ethically wrong and will likely limit referrals. So there's a real outcome to not paying attention here. And so maybe what I should say is not only ethically wrong, but will likely limit referrals, okay? People that don't get the results they want because you've mispromised them aren't going to tell you other people about how good you are, okay? So above all, be a good human. I do believe that the world can be a better place with more coaching. And that takes more coaches. And so be the coach that keeps the focus on humanity. I refer to this often as my second chapter. It's my give back tour. So I get to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want this time. And I think that we can make the world a better place. And so with that, let's do one more case study. And this one's going to be a 5-minute one again, and just a thought. And so So if you want to take a screenshot of it again, I mean, it's a good time to do that. So when you first launched your coaching practice, you poured your heart into every client. Your niche was different then and focused on the kinds of challenges that excited you at the time. But as you've grown, so has your focus. You've discovered new areas that light you up, expanded your offerings, and increased your rates to match the depth of experience and transformation you now deliver. And yet, a couple of those first clients are still with you. They've been paying the same rates they started, which are far less than your newer clients invest. You care about them, but if you're honest, the sessions feel heavier now. The spark you once had for that kind of work you were doing with them has faded. You've even caught yourself canceling or rescheduling their appointments, something that would have been unthinkable when you were just starting out. What ethical considerations might be present here? And how might you apply that notion of ethicality? And so, Catherine, if you will, let's do 5 minutes and then we'll wrap it up. What did you notice about this? Anybody?
Kind of that sense of going back to the agreement, like, how are you designing the way in which you're going to be in relationship with each other? And is it going to be a long-term engagement? Is it going to be, Theodora talked about, how do we, when you have a relationship or an agreement with a coach, being open-ended without an end date, without a time period is probably not doing anybody a real service. And so how do you get in front of that in terms of, okay, if we're going to renew or we're going to, change our agreement or add on because our initial program is done, then that's a great time to have those conversations and say, okay, here's what's changed since we originally contracted.
Yeah. When's the last time you guys raised your rates?
Mm-hmm.
What's your time worth now that it wasn't worth before? Okay. And I will take, this comes up in supervision a fair bit. And the question then becomes a lot of times from my supervision clients is, what happens if they don't want to renew with me? I don't know what happens. And so there's that piece, right? So what's going on with us in this space? And I think that's a big piece of it. What's going on here? And so and I love that Theodora took it back to the ethics. Should that be an open-ended agreement?
Mm-hmm.
That's a big question. At the service of the client, who's being served?
I love that question too, because whether or not it's an ethical thing to have it open-ended, it just makes it a whole lot easier for you to force a conversation at some point. And so why not see that so that you don't end up in the ethical dilemma later, by just making it easy on yourself. This is for 1 year, or this is for 6 months, or whatever, and now you've forced the conversation.
Yeah. Thanks, Trista. I mean, I would just say to Theodora, how many times do you guys deal with things that really come back down to a question about the contract?
Oh, it's always.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And so part of the conversation we're having today is, what are the things that you might want to be thinking about before you do this, or as you do this, before it becomes an ethical dilemma? What else came up for you guys in this?
Also exploring what is going on with us at that point, and are we still the right person for this client if we're having a decline? Is it like Trista was saying, is it that we resent the money part, or is it that maybe it's no longer who we want to coach? I believe Theodora brought that up.
Take it to your supervisor. Have a conversation with your supervisor. That's what we're for.
Yay. Thank you for that shameless plug. I love it. The reality of it is, I mean, if you've ever seen Hoda Kotb, she has this term, for a reason, for a season, for life. I mean, so many of our clients are with us for a reason. And if the reason is no longer there, then what are we doing? And so, I mean, are they for life? I mean, oh my goodness. The goal of coaching is self-efficacy of your clients, not, a lifetime engagement. And so maybe one of the questions on ethicality is how am I as a coach helping them with their ethicality or with their efficacy, right? If I'm making them codependent on me and I'm dependent on the money they're paying me to show up. I mean, what is that about?
The word that comes up for me is integrity.
Yeah, and again, I think that's, kind of where it comes up. What's your integrity in this space? Because I'm not going to lay it on somebody else and say, well, what are you thinking? Because that's my judgment of you and my bias. My question is going to be what's coming up for you in that this has become the conversation we're having today. And then what do you do with this information? I mean, I think that's a fair question to ask. Might be nothing, but now that I always call it now you can't be unaware anymore. Now that you're aware, you don't go like, well, I wasn't aware of that. It's like, or I just don't want to be aware of that anymore. Well, darn. So I saw another hand come up. Who else had a hand up?
I had my
Yeah,
hand up.
sure, Natalie.
I agree with what has been said thus far. And I also think that we have to have an ethical agreement with ourselves. As we grow, educate, develop, and add experience, then having those margins of increase in rate is actually a responsibility too to the coaching profession and to the industry as a whole and ourselves. And so like going back, like even a viewing the big picture, what's my trajectory as a coach and my personal growth and development and the rates that go along with that, and building that into our contracts.
Yeah, I mean, remember the early days of trying to figure out what you were going to charge people? And yet, as I tell my students, how much money have you invested in your own growth in this space? And what I know is when I get something for free, I don't value it. In fact, I want to, because, well, I might need one later too, right? So how much have you invested in your own growth? And what's your time worth now that you know more than you knew before? And you can apply this thing. But I think the big, the aha for me when I was writing this was, and now you're canceling and rescheduling. When's the last time you canceled or rescheduled with a client? Yeah, I'm telling you, my own personal code is like, I will wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning if I've changed time zones, so I can be online with a client rather than reschedule with them. All right. Heck, I'd be up at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I have been, because I hold so firmly that commitment that I made to that meeting. And so if I'm in a position where I'm like, yeah, I'll just reschedule it, back to what's going on with me here, and how is my behavior serving this client? So there's so many pieces to these case studies. I said if it was right and wrong, it wouldn't really be an ethical issue, would it? And so I think that's the piece that that is in this ethics space is, I say be the best version of you as a coach and as a human, because that's where that ethicality piece comes in. And so a couple last slides. I think we've covered some of this, but I will ask you, let me move this up a little bit so I can manipulate this. So any thoughts or questions? And before I do that, I'm going to tell you, if you've got questions regarding the ICF Code of Ethics, contact the ICF Ethics hotline at ethics@coachingfederation.org, or there's a phone number. And there are people that are way better at this than me, that can really walk you through some of this, or at least help you out with it. I'm always a resource. I say go to a mentor coach, go to a supervisor, because much of what we do in this space has to deal with some of these issues. But for the big things, that's my source. And I think the foundation that this provides us is solid. Here's my information if you're looking for me. And so with that, I think I'm right on time, but I could take like maybe one question if somebody's got a question they want to ask. Okay, if not, I will hand it back to Christine.
Bonnie, thank you so much for that thought-provoking. My head is just moving with things I want to change or do better, think about, reflect on. So thank you so much. Catherine or Carrie, do you have anything to share regarding what's coming up for ICF High Country?
Well, again, I really want to thank you, Bonnie. I do want to point out that we have a Coaches Connect on April 1st. And then, what is it, April 10th, Trista, who's here, is one of our panelists, along with Carol, Robert, and Tanner Wortham on assessments in action. And so you will have the opportunity to talk about some of that. We'll highlight a few paid assessments, but also have the opportunity for you to ask questions about, like, do you want to be certified in this? Why would I want to? Where would I use it? Where would it be useful? And be able to get some answers from our panel regarding those things. And I will tell you that it's a great panel. I'll highlight Trista just because, I mean, if I was to list her certifications in different assessments, yeah, and Bonnie knows her and knows that that's true. She has a lot of knowledge around where she would use them and a lot of experience. So, and she's great at the pros and cons. I know she doesn't love the attention, but she gets it anyways. And then in May, we'll have a Coaches Connect, and then it will be our ICW program. Carrie, is there anything else that you want to add?
No, nothing else. I think just for the ICW, it is the Coast to Coast Pro Bono Challenge that we did last year. So if you haven't heard about it, keep an eye out. What will happen? We partner with ICF LA is the one that actually leads the way in this, but there are chapters all over the world that get involved. And basically the request is, will you be open to offering, I think it's like 2, 3, 4, 5 hours of pro bono time to spread awareness of what coaching can be. And that could be within an organization, outside of an organization, et cetera. And those hours that you donate get logged into a spreadsheet, and we track them to see what the impact of our offering of coaching and giving someone the chance to experience is across the world. And so our chapter is again going to support the effort that ICF LA leads, and would love to have each one of you participate with us. It's really special and neat to see the impact that we make. So keep an eye on that. We'll have lots of stuff coming out about it and some information on the website, but that's, coast to coast. Keep an eye out. Woo woo.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And one last plug, I put the survey in the chat a little earlier, so please make sure in order to get your 1.5 credits of ethics, you need to complete that survey. So please do that. And I think that's about it.
And the
Thank
recording
you
will
so
be
much.
sent out to you as well when it's available. So you'll be able to review again. Thank you all so much.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you.